Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us this evening. To start, I'd like to thank Cindy Thompson from Alternative Communication Services for providing CART this evening. And welcome Dr. Abram Bailey, who will be presenting Improve Your Next Hearing Aid Experience with Hearing Tracker. I am very excited to hear your presentation, Dr. Bailey. I know that this is a area of interest for our members, and it looks like you have a lot of good information to present this evening, so I'll let you go ahead and get started. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. I hope everyone can hear me all right. I'm not actually seeing the CART coming through on my screen. I'm not sure if that's something that's meant to be live. Or not. All you need to do is click the CC button at the top or hit Control F8. Okay, I just didn't want to get started until I made sure that was working. So thank you for the nice introduction, and yeah, I just wanted to sort of reiterate thank you guys for coming. I know it's a busy holiday season for most of you. And it's definitely full on for us here as well down in Austin. But I hope to give you some good information that will prove to be valuable for you. And hopefully some of the ones that missed this presentation can catch it on the recording for later. So I guess I'll go ahead and get started. So obviously the name of the talk is Improve Your Next Hearing Aid Experience with Hearing Tracker. I've kind of already had the introduction, but this is me, Abram Bailey. I'm a doctor of audiology. I graduated from Vanderbilt University in 2009. I'm a member of the Academy of Doctors of Audiology and the New Zealand Audiological Society. I'm a licensed audiologist in Texas, residing in Austin, and I'm originally from New Orleans. So I guess we'll just get started with a little outline of the presentation. First, we'll talk about the big problem with hearing care. Next, I'll explain what to look for in a hearing provider and how to make sense of hearing aid features. While you should leave the actual hearing aid selecting to your audiologist, I would recommend becoming familiar with hearing aid features and technologies so you can be an educated participant in the hearing aid selection process. After this learning session, I'll show you how to apply your new knowledge to locate exceptional hearing providers and hearing aids using Hearing Tracker. So what is the big problem with hearing care? Consumer Reports estimates that as many as 2/3 of hearing aids in the U.S. are misfit. Meanwhile, a large percentage of audiologists still fail to provide essential services. This is important because receiving essential services greatly improves the chances for success with hearing aids. So what kind of essential services might you be missing out on? There was a survey of audiologists conducted in 2012 by ASHA, the American Speech Hearing Association, that found that a large percentage of audiologists still fail to provide validation of aided outcomes using speech, validation of outcomes by self-questionnaires, verification of performance with real-ear measures. I know you probably, some of you may not know what any of those things are, and I'm going to try to go through in more detail and try to kind of explain it to the non-audiologists who are here with us tonight. And I also wanted to read this quote from Sergei Kochkin. Many of you may know who he is. He's done a lot of research to sort of track the hearing market and lots of surveys with big populations. A conclusion that he recently drew in 2014 after doing a survey was that consumers can be satisfied with a hearing aid, but significantly more satisfied if all best practices are employed. So that's something I'm going to focus on a lot tonight. We're going to call them essential services, but you might also call these best practices from the perspective of an audiologist. So with all this in mind, all these problems, what is the good news? So there are plenty of audiologists out there who do provide essential services, who do have best practices, and I'm going to try to explain to you what those things are and how I'm hoping that Hearing Tracker can help you to locate people that provide those services. So, how to find a hearing provider. First step, know what to look for. So, again, we're going to be talking about essential services. This is what I think you need to try to understand so that you can try to look for these things in a provider. After we talk about the essential services, we're going to talk about successful patients, because that's another thing that you're going to look for. If you can find a successful patient of an audiologist, that's a good sign. So maybe that's someone you should visit as well. Another possibly less important but still significant factor may be the educational background of the audiologist. And I'm not just saying that because I have a doctor of audiology. It is something that, you know, it might make somebody slightly more qualified to deal with complex problems. So depending on what kind of person you are, if you're a very straightforward kind of a patient or someone who has more complex needs, the educational background of your provider may make a significant difference, and we'll talk about that a little more. Okay. So what are essential services in audiology, and how do I find them? And pardon me, I'm going to read from my notes because I want to be very clear. So fortunately, you don't have to look far to find a good guideline for essential services in audiology. The American Academy of Audiology formed a task force in 2003 with the express purpose of developing a national guideline for fitting hearing aids to adults. The task force spent 3 years developing the guideline and pored over the best research available in audiology to determine which clinical services mattered most to patient outcomes. The guideline is also endorsed by the American Speech Language Hearing Association. This guideline is readily available online, and I will post a link to it in my webinar. However, I'd like to spend a few minutes going over the guideline to help you understand it as a consumer. The guideline includes service recommendations in a few key areas, including the auditory assessment, the needs assessment, quality control, hearing aid fitting and orientation, counseling, and outcome assessment. So we'll start with the auditory assessment. So these are some of the recommended services as recommended by the guideline. So first we want to see a comprehensive case history. And that means that your audiologist is asking you all about your past, anything to do with your ears or that might be a factor in your medical history related to your ears, your hearing history, your current hearing problems, all of these things. And a lot of these things are going to be pretty standard, but some of the things we're going to talk about are more exceptional tests that not everybody does provide. The next step is diagnosing hearing loss. Obviously, this is something that most providers are going to have to do to get anywhere with you as a patient. But the diagnosis, just as a comment here, it should include a tympanometry test. And how that works is they put a small probe into your ear, which puts a little bit of pressure into your ear, and that's going to give the audiologist some idea of what's going on behind your eardrum. If you've got any physical issues that might be causing you to have a hearing loss, and that is something that is important, and if there are any medical issues there, there may be a need to refer you on. So I've pretty much covered that. Measure loudness discomfort levels, and this is something that it's kind of a frustrating test for the patient because the audiologist has to play some kind of loud beeps in your ear while they're doing the hearing test. And unfortunately, it's not fun, but it does have a reward, which is when we get to fitting the hearing aid, we actually know where your loudness discomfort levels are, so that we can try to keep the hearing aid levels underneath that so that you don't have to be as disturbed by your hearing aid. I mean, you will eventually get into the right place by a little to and fro with your audiologist. I mean, they can always turn down the hearing aids later, but this just gets them in the right ballpark a little bit easier, and it's a little bit more of an organized way of doing it. The otoscopic inspection, okay, so that's just looking in your ears with a scope and just making sure that everything looks okay in there. And many audiologists today are getting involved with cerumen management, so that means actually being able to remove earwax from your ears while you're there in the clinic. And that will save you a lot of time if you can find an audiologist who does provide that service. Not everyone does, but just make sure that they've had some level of extra training to do that, or a lot of experience, because sometimes providers do take risks, I believe, when it comes to that. So you want to make sure that you trust the person who's providing that service. Another part of the auditory assessment is counseling. So basically, once your test is done, and before the test even, there needs to be some counseling to the patient, to the family. I also want to just say this right up front, that it's always recommended, if you're going to go to your audiologist, to try to bring somebody with you who's like a communication partner, someone that you're close to, and someone who knows you well, because they are going to learn from that experience, and they're also going to be able to provide information about you that might be valuable to the provider. They're also going to establish candidacy and motivation toward amplification. So these are all the important steps that kind of happen during that initial auditory assessment. Okay, so moving on to the needs assessment. So this is where the audiologist is going to get even more information about you, about your hearing needs and goals. So in order to provide any kind of recommended treatment, the audiologist needs to have some kind of goals in mind, and they need to know, what you're driven to really with your needs. To do this, you could simply have a conversation with your audiologist, and that's a very informal way of doing it, and lots of people do that. But I'm a firm believer that you should complete what we're calling now income measurements. And those can include a whole bunch of different surveys that are more formalized and validated through lots of experience that we've had with these surveys in the field. One example is called the Hearing Handicap Inventory. Another one is called the Abbreviated Profile of Hearing Aid Benefit. So these questionnaires, hopefully you've seen, hopefully you've got an audiologist who does actually run with these kinds of tests. And the other thing that's kind of a bonus with these income measurements is once you're actually done with the whole process of having your hearing aids fitted, at the very end you'll have a chance to complete kind of a second part to this income measure, and we call those an outcome measure. And by gathering this information up front, we have a direct comparison of a before and after to see how you've done as a patient with the treatment that we've provided. Okay, so we're learning about current hearing difficulties. We're learning about level of perceived handicap. We're learning about hearing goals and motivation, and we're learning about treatment expectations. So hopefully that appointment is taken very seriously by your audiologist, and they try to gather as much good information from you as possible to make the right recommendations. The audiologist should also, at that time, do some assessments of your dexterity and vision, and make sure that you have adequate support systems in terms of help for you to be a successful hearing aid user. If you've got problems with your manual dexterity, that's going to be an important factor in driving the decision about the type of hearing aid that's recommended. If you can't see very well, then it's going to be important that you get a large battery, for example, or a hearing aid that's not microscopic. So these are things to consider at this stage. Okay, so these are some hearing aid considerations. Basically, these are the things that audiologists should be thinking about when they recommend a hearing aid. They should be thinking about the style of the hearing aid. Is it an in-the-ear hearing aid? Is it this kind of hearing aid that goes behind the ear with the thin wire? Is it a big behind-the-ear hearing aid with a mold? That's what we mean when we say hearing aid style. The volume of the hearing aid and the frequency range. So depending on your particular level of loss, the audiologist is going to be able to recommend a hearing aid that is going to be adequate for that level of loss in terms of volume. And this is one of the big things I think about, actually having a hearing aid selected by a good audiologist as opposed to, getting something off the internet. you can be sure, if you can trust your audiologist, that you're going to get a hearing aid that's got adequate volume and hopefully has a little bit of extra range if your hearing gets worse, so that it can be turned up without you having to buy a new one. The other thing is frequency range. If you have hearing loss, let's say only in the higher pitches, and it's only mild, well, you might benefit from having a hearing aid that produces very, very high pitches, whereas a lot of people, their hearing kind of slopes down, and they really can't make any use of those extra high pitches. So your audiologist shouldn't be trying to sell you an extra high frequency hearing aid if you can't even make use of those sounds. Okay, so ear canal size and geometry. This is a big one. You cannot physically use some hearing aids with some patients. If they've got a really nice cylindrical ear canal, you might be able to get away with a completely in the canal hearing aid. If they've got a really tiny ear canal that's narrow and bendy, forget about it. That's not going to work. You're going to need to get a hearing aid with a little thin tube or something that's going to be able to get into that sort of geometry. And again, that's something that, ordering something off the internet, you're not going to, that's not the topic of this conversation, but this gets me thinking about it. Ease of insertion and manipulation. This is something that I think if you have a chance to practice with the audiologist in the clinic, like for example, if you've got this hearing aid shown in the picture, it's easy for the audiologist to have a demonstration hearing aid in the clinic for you to pick up and try onto your ear before you even come in for the hearing aid fitting, and that'll save you both time. So if they have a custom-made hearing aid, that may not be possible because it's got to be made for your ear. But when possible, I think it's a great idea to just have a little check of that and make sure that the patient's comfortable getting the hearing aid in, touching the little buttons, removing the hearing aid. Okay. So need for specific features. Okay, so telecoil. Nancy and I were just talking about telecoils earlier. This is, I believe, a really important hardware feature for a hearing aid. It's what allows you to pick up the telephone and telecoil loops. I still think, even with all the modern technology that's out today with streaming, that a telecoil is still very valuable and should still be considered. Not everybody needs a telecoil. If you have a mild hearing loss and you're going to have an open-fitting style of hearing aid, there may not be any point to that. But these are the things the audiologist should be thinking about when they get to know you, when they measure your hearing loss, when they're thinking about the style of hearing aid you need, when they're thinking about your hearing needs. Do you have trouble on the telephone? Is going to church your primary hearing need? If so, is your church looped with a telecoil loop? DAI, that's direct audio input. I'm not going to cover all the features. I will go into them a little bit later. But these, again, are some of the things that your audiologist should be thinking about when they're deciding on a hearing aid to fit you with. Comfort and skin sensitivity. I can't tell you the number of patients I've had who have had itchy ears, and we've had to sort of modify the hearing aid that we chose for them. So it doesn't hurt to ask those questions up front to just try to save time for both the patient and for the doctor. Occlusion. Many of you may know what that is. It's when you have a hearing aid kind of blocking your ear and you're talking and you can hear your voice in the ear. That's something that we need to think about when we're recommending a hearing aid. Is this something that is likely to bother the person? Are we going to be creating a lot of occlusion with this type of recommendation? And then obviously we need to talk about cosmetic concerns. So, how do you want to look with your hearing aid? Is that a big concern for you? And I'm sure many of you have been through this decision-making process with an audiologist, and it is pretty standard, but it's just important that an audiologist follows all of these steps when they go ahead and choose a hearing aid. And they should be talking to you about it. Okay, so this is one that I really like, performing electroacoustic testing. We're calling this quality control. I did write some notes here, so I'll go ahead and read them. Due to quality control issues in hearing aid factories, new hearing aids should always undergo quality checks before being fitted. Your audiologist can check that the microphone, speaker, and amplifier are all working properly using an electroacoustic test box, which is considered an essential piece of clinical equipment. In the test box, sound is played out and the response from the hearing aid is measured. Every hearing aid comes with a set of acoustic benchmarks from the factory, which should be reproducible in the clinic by putting the hearing aid into the test box and taking a measurement. Your audiologist should also perform an electroacoustic assessment following a hearing aid repair. They should be diligent in verifying the work of the repair facility and ensuring that your hearing aid has not been damaged during shipping. Finally, your audiologist should measure your hearing aid settings in the test box after your hearing aids have been set up for you. Your audiologist may make small adjustments throughout the hearing aid evaluation process, but when you have decided you are happy with the settings, the audiologist should make a record of the hearing aid's performance. If this has been done, your audiologist and anyone else trained to use the test box will be able to quickly and accurately test your hearing aid for a drop in performance. Such a test might be used at an annual checkup. So basically, the idea is you can see the woman in the picture. She's put the hearing aid in the box. The sound comes through from a little speaker that's inside that box, so she would have to close the box. And the hearing aid picks up that sound, amplifies it, and that sound that gets amplified by the hearing aid gets picked up by a microphone. So there's lots of testing that can be done even without having the patient in the room to ensure that the hearing aid is working the way that it should. And those tests should be done on a regular basis after these kinds of events, and the measurements that are taken at each of those times should be printed off and put into the patient's file. So that's something that you can kind of check on your audiologist about and say, have you been running measurements of my hearing aid in a test box? You know, is this something you do on a regular basis here? It's not fundamental, but I think it would save a lot of problems if everyone was doing this. Okay, so sorry, we're going to talk a little bit more in the technical area about hearing aid fittings. So these are some of the recommendations that the guideline makes for that. So verify that the hearing aid is meeting your prescription. Okay, so what does that mean? I can probably just kind of go verbatim. So let's talk about this guy down here pointing his finger at the computer. That's actually a friend of mine named Doug, and I told him he'd be in the presentation tonight. And that is a picture of him that was taken when we were back at Vanderbilt. And that girl in the picture is another friend of mine named Elise. So anyway, so what the audiologist should do is they should, once they've got your hearing test result, they put it into a computer, and the computer generates a prescription based on your hearing loss. So this is something that a little more than half of audiologists are doing right now, and that's a survey of audiologists. I don't know what the numbers are like for hearing instrument specialists, but suffice to say that there are a lot of people out there who are not receiving this service. And I'll explain the service a little bit more and why I think it's important. So once they have a prescription on the computer, they're going to take a measurement from inside of your ear to make sure that the hearing aid is up to scratch with your prescription. So if you look at that ear on the right there, you can see that there's a little tiny tube which is going into the man's ear, and it's coming up from the bottom. That tube is actually a tube microphone. So it goes down in the ear past where the speaker is, and it can actually measure the sound that's coming through the hearing aid. Okay, so looking back at that box, or the computer on the left, so what happens is that computer plays out sounds, and those sounds arrive at the hearing aid amplifies the sounds, and then those sounds go into your ear. When the sounds go into your ear, the microphone picks up the sound. So that's how we do it. And then what we do is we make adjustments to the hearing aid while we're taking those measurements to try to get the hearing aid closer to your prescription. And the reason prescriptions are so important is because when these prescriptive formulas are created, they're created for the purpose of bringing speech into the audible hearing range. So if we don't follow a prescription, it's highly likely that your hearing aids are not going to be giving you the maximum benefit that they could. And this is a touchy issue. A lot of people say that, you know, they weren't trained on these machines and it's not important, and you can do it kind of by talking to the patient and asking how things sound. And I think some people probably are better at that than others, and maybe some people do that well. But I think for the most part, the reason why this is important is because it gets the audiologist into into the ballpark, so that they at least know that the hearing aid is capable of meeting your prescription. At least they know it's capable of giving you maximum benefit. I mean, maybe you don't want the hearing aid set that way. Maybe it's too loud or too sharp. But one day, if you're a new user of hearing aids, one day soon, after a while, you may want the hearing aid louder than you want it on the first day. So we know when we've done this test that the hearing aids can be adjusted up to the point that they need to be, if that comes. So anyway, it's an objective measurement, and it makes audiology a heck of a lot more scientific. And I think without it, practitioners are really operating blindly to try to get the sound right for you. So that's, I'll get off my pedestal about that now. The other thing that we can do about that with that tool is we can verify that the hearing aids aren't too loud. So when we took those loudness discomfort levels earlier at your auditory assessment, now we can punch those numbers into our measurement box, and then we can make sure that the hearing aids aren't exceeding those levels. So again, it's just getting it all right with science. Okay, so the other thing we can do is we can verify the features of the hearing aid, such as the telecoil and the directional microphones. So if we put the hearing aid into the telecoil mode and hold the phone up to your ear, we can see that it's working. We can also check that in the test box, but this is just another way to do it. And there are even ways to check the directional microphones. For example, we can have the patient turn their seat around and we can take a measurement from behind them or take a measurement from the front, and then we can compare those results and make sure that the sound that's coming in from the front was coming in louder. And I'll just make a note about this. If you have this test done, it's really important that the sound that you hear, it's not like a beeping sound, because that's old equipment, and the new hearing aids, they don't respond as well to that. So when you have this kind of test done, you should be hearing speech sounds. It can be speech-like noise, or it can be someone actually speaking. It depends on the tools that they actually have at the clinic. But if it sounds kind of like speech, then they're probably doing it right. Okay, so I'm going to skip that. I'm going to see if I had anything else written down that I wanted to tell you about. No. Okay, so the orientation, you're going to want to talk about, your audiologist is going to need to give you some information and counseling on hearing aid features, insertion and removal, battery use, care and cleaning, comfort and feedback, and by feedback I mean the whistling, telephone use, and any warranty information about your hearing aids. So this is kind of the basic information. Once you've had your hearing aid fitting, you shouldn't be kicked out the door. You should have someone, maybe it's not your audiologist, but it's someone at the clinic who's going to spend some time with you, making sure that you understand how the hearing aid operates, how to use it, how to clean it, the warranty, all that stuff. By the end of the orientation, you should be competent and able to do all of these things yourself. Okay, and I'm realizing that the time is flying by faster than I thought it would, so I'm going to try to speed up a little bit if possible. So the essential services, this is counseling and follow-up. Now, when you once you've had that kind of basic orientation, it's good for the audiologist to go over some of these other things. So adjusting to amplification, your goals and expectations, talking about those after the hearing aid fitting, talking about what it's going to be like to be out there in background noise at a restaurant, what it's going to be like watching TV, listening to the radio. All of these things they should be discussed before you leave the clinic so that you have really good understanding of the experience that you're about to go through, so you feel motivated as well with kind of overcoming the challenge of this new hearing aid fitting. They should talk about listening and communication strategies, and it's helpful if you would have your communication partners there with you. Whether it's your wife or your husband, your son, your father, whoever it is that you talk to the most, bring that person into the clinic with you. Hearing assistive technology, this should be discussed and discussed and discussed from beginning to end. When you have your initial hearing aid conversation, these things should be considered. Not everybody needs a hearing aid. Sometimes, just say your only issue is television. Well, maybe you just need a television amplifier or something that's going to broadcast the sound over to you while you watch TV. Or maybe it's just the phone that you have a problem with. Oh, sorry, I've skipped. So, and the other thing with hearing assistive technology is sometimes hearing assistive technology needs to be used in conjunction with your hearing aids. So sometimes hearing aids are the answer, but you might also need an FM system or an amplified telephone or other things that are going to be used together with your hearing aids. So these should all be talked about with your audiologist. Your audiologist should bring these things up. I hope they do. And speech reading, that's just lip reading, that kind of stuff. So obviously that's going to be for some people more than others that are going to need that service. The more profound your loss is, the more likely it is that you may need a little bit of help with that. Okay, so we're getting close to the end here. This is the last slide I have on essential services. And I'm sorry I've spent so much time on it. I did think it was important and worth talking about. So I hope it's been educational. Now you're going to come at this sort of final appointment. So after you've gone out and you've tried your hearing aids and you've come back to the audiologist, what they're going to do is they're going to take, what they should be doing is taking those initial income surveys that you completed at the beginning, like the HHI or the AFAB, which had basically benchmarked where you were. And they're going to run, hopefully, those tests again, those surveys again, to make sure that you have seen a positive change due to having the hearing aids fitted. So, or the hearing assistive technology. Okay, these can be done for that too. So did you experience a huge benefit? That's a good thing, and that's something that the audiologist needs to be aware of. If you did not have a big positive change, then the audiologist should kind of have a big conversation with you and see if there's anything else that can be done with the hearing aids. Maybe they need to consider other hearing assistive technology that they need to add into the picture. So that's the way that those appointments should kind of end, I guess, is on a good note with your audiologist feeling that there has been a positive change and that the hearing aids have made a difference. Okay. So how to find a hearing provider. So talk to friends. Hearing loss is nothing to be ashamed about. Find a friend with hearing aids and ask about their experience. Use your knowledge of essential services to get a gauge on the quality of care they received. So perhaps you guys knew about all those things I talked about already, but if you didn't, now you've got something to talk about. You've got new questions to ask your friends. Did they have you fill out all these surveys at the beginning and the end? Did they sit you in front of the box and play sounds out? Those kind of questions you can ask now. So I kind of just said what I wrote here. But the other thing I wanted to talk about is, with your HLAA meetings, I know you had a lot of you I met at HLAA in Austin this year. And a lot of you told me that one of the big topics at your local chapter meetings is talking about the local audiologists in your area. Unfortunately, some people put it to me this way. They said, well, basically we get together and moan about them and complain about them because they're not happy with their audiologist. But I'm hoping to drive some maybe more constructive meetings where you try to identify who in the group has been to an audiologist who has provided these kinds of essential services and who has also had a positive outcome with his hearing aids or her hearing aids. And the other thing is look online. And I don't want you guys to think that I think Hearing Tracker is the only place to look. And in fact, I'll say to you that Hearing Tracker is a relatively young website, and that we only really got our start in March. I do think that Hearing Tracker is going to become the primary resource for looking online to find a provider, but I don't think that that time has come yet. However, I would still look there on the chance that your providers listed, that you've got some providers listed or reviewed in your area, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. All right, so I did tell you one last thing that I was going to talk about was how to find a hearing provider. In that section of how to find a hearing provider is educational background. And I said it's less important but worth considering. So in the US, the three kind of, I guess, biggest or best educational backgrounds that you could find would be the Masters of Science in Audiology, and that used to be the main sort of program for clinical audiologists up until 2007, when that was replaced by the Doctor of Audiology. And it did go from being a 2-year to a 4-year program. And I think the Masters of Science maybe did have a year of clinical after the 2 years. So maybe it was actually a 3-year program. But at any rate, they've added at least a year and kind of got us to do a few extra things like study more about balance and dizziness and get a little bit deeper into the anatomy and stuff like that. But really, most people I know who have a Masters of Science, MS, are great audiologists, so long as they have good experience and know what they're doing. So, but you can meet a doctor of audiology who's not the best at fitting hearing aids either. So there's so many things to consider, and definitely looking only at their education isn't the answer. But it's another piece of the puzzle. So, Doctor of Philosophy in Audiology. I know some doctors, some PhDs who are great in the clinic. Some are more research focused. But certainly if they're out there practicing and they've got a PhD in audiology, they're worth considering to see. Okay, so understanding hearing aid features. And I'm calling this apples and apples versus apples and oranges. All right, and I didn't take too many notes, so. So basically here, I'm calling these the apples and apples features. So they're kind of yes or no features. These are hearing aid features that they're either included or they're not. So the telecoil is an easy one. That's a hardware feature. So either the hearing aid has a telecoil in it or it doesn't. Volume control button, same story. If the hearing aid has a volume control button, you can control the volume with the button. If it doesn't have a volume control button, then you're maybe going to need a remote control, or you maybe won't have control over the volume. Push button, again, same story as the volume control. You can change the manual programs of the hearing aid for different settings using a manual button in the case that it has a button. If it doesn't have a button, then it's either going to be fully automatic or you're going to need a remote control or a smartphone to control it. Directional microphone. 99% of hearing aids today have directional microphones. So that's not such a big deal to kind of need to look for that. Now with hearing aids, it's gotten more into an apples and oranges situation with directional microphones, where you have so many different kinds of digital algorithms for how directional microphones are controlled, and that is kind of beyond the scope of just doing a simple product comparison. Synchronization and streaming. So synchronization is when a hearing aid, when you, for example, tap a button on one hearing aid and it changes the setting in that hearing aid and also changes the setting in the other hearing aid. It can also mean automatic changes in the hearing aid are synchronized. So for example, the volume, if it automatically adjusts in one hearing aid, it adjusts in the other. And there's other ways that that's used, but that's the idea with synchronization. And that's fundamentally different from streaming, which is where you actually are taking the sound from one hearing aid and sending the entire sound to the other hearing aid. So I'm aware of a few companies that do streaming of phone calls from one ear to the other. I know Phonak does it, and I'm pretty sure Unitron, maybe Starkey, I'm not sure, but basically you hold the phone up to your ear, the sound from that ear can come in to this ear, so your telephone conversation is now coming into both ears. And there's other ways that kind of streaming technology is used for doing kind of sophisticated comparisons of sounds that are coming into both ears. And a lot of that stuff's still a little bit experimental, but there is some research to suggest that the sound quality or your potential to benefit can be better with some of these new streaming technologies. And that is kind of an apples and orange one, because what's being done with streaming may be different in different products. But it's worth thinking about and talking to your audiologist about. Smartphone compatibility. Okay, either the hearing aid can talk to a smartphone or it can't. And this is something that's all the rage right now. A lot of hearing aids are capable of doing this, and you can control it with your iPhone. You might be able to stream music from your iPhone or talk on Skype with your iPhone. There's also ones for Android. I think Siemens has Android now. So that's really cool stuff, and I think that's going to continue to kind of get better and better and help people who have those phones. Music program, that's a lot of hearing aids have music programs, very few don't, but that's still something that you should ask about if music's important to you, because hearing aids by nature are processing sound with speech in mind. And the way that hearing aids process speech sounds to make those phonemes audible and comfortable is very, very different from the way you might want music processed. So not having a music program and liking music could be a problem. The IP rating is basically going to be ingress. I think it's called ingress protection, but it's kind of like a rating of a hearing aid, how well it repels water or withstands water, and also physical ingress, so things like dust. So I have had a lot of patients who worked in factories or places like that where there's lots and lots of dust being kicked up. And it's really, really important if you're in a dirty or wet environment, or if you like to go hiking in the outdoors up in Washington or something where it's raining all the time, you need to think about getting a hearing aid that has some kind of IP rating. I know a lot of the hearing aids now are being made with like little rubber gaskets around all the orifices, and those need to be replaced from time to time. But it's getting really, really good now, and I'm really excited because I had so many problems in a few years back with hearing aids and moisture and sweat and dust. So that has come a long way. DAI is direct audio input, so some of you may be familiar with that, where you have a big behind-the-ear hearing aid, and you can actually plug directly into that, and you might be able to plug in like an MP3 player, or you could plug in an FM system and get sound streaming into your hearing aid. So that's also FM systems. That's where you can kind of usually use with a DAI, but sometimes you can use it wirelessly without the DAI. And that's where someone can take a microphone and stand far away from you, like on the other side of the room, or even just the other side of the table, hold the microphone near to them, and the sound comes straight into your ears. Manual programs, that kind of relates to the push button. Basically, if you want to change the hearing aid settings from one kind of environment to another, like say quiet environment, noisy environment, you may want more manual programs. So if you're someone who has a bunch of different environments and you're kind of a control freak and you really want to have control over how the hearing aid sounds in those environments, it may be important for you to consider a hearing aid with lots of manual programs. If you're somebody who doesn't really care and you just want the hearing aid to be automatic, it may not be a big deal at all. Battery size, battery life, that's something to consider. And I'm sure that your audiologist will talk to you about that, but the smaller the battery life. I've seen battery life as little as 2 to 3 days, and I won't name hearing aids that have that kind of performance, but I can tell you that the same battery in different hearing aids is not always the same amount of lifetime. A microphone array is where you've got this actually relates to streaming. So when the sound can go from one hearing aid to the other hearing aid, with the microphone array, they can actually combine the sound from both hearing aids to have like a four microphones going at the same time, all being compared by the hearing aid. And the theory is that you can actually do some kind of beamforming and create like a super directional hearing aid. And I do think there's a lot of potential for that to help people in background noise. It's still not going to be better than, like, say, an FM system, but it's worth considering if you're really struggling in background noise and you don't want to carry around an FM system. Bandwidth, I talked a little bit about that earlier. I'll skip that one. Channels, that's kind of the same thing as programs. Well, not programs, but bands. I'll skip that one as well. I could get into a lot about that. Accessories, that's going to be like your remote controls, your streamers, the things you might use to, say, pick up a telephone call, TV adapters, all these kinds of things that hearing aids can potentially be purchased together with. It may be worth doing some exploring about the accessories that are available for your hearing aids if you might need some of those things. I've had a lot of people not even get the accessories at first and then come back to me and say, well, I'm really happy with the hearing aids, but I'm still struggling with the phone, or I'm still struggling with the TV. And sometimes you fit that person with a hearing aid that doesn't have any accessories available. And you're like, this is not good. I can't help this person with this issue. So think about those things before jumping in. Okay. So here's some more features. I'm sorry this is so long, and this is what I'm calling more the apples to oranges, and I'm calling that algorithms and strategies. So I'm just going to kind of breeze through this as fast as I can. Digital noise suppression. Okay, that is the hearing aid turning down sound, kind of background noise sound. And I want to be clear that it's oftentimes sold as a way to turn down background noise and make speech more audible, but there's not a lot of evidence to support that. Really, it's a comfort thing. So digital noise suppression makes sometimes loud situations more comfortable, not necessarily making them any easier to hear. Okay, feedback suppression is getting rid of the whistling. Reverberation suppression is like when you're in an echoey room, trying to kind of dumb down some of that echoiness, because those echoes can smear sound and make it harder for you to pick up on phonemes and parts of speech. Wind suppression, that's another one that's highly variable between different hearing aids. Every hearing aid company has a different idea of how to deal with noise suppression, feedback suppression, reverberation suppression, wind suppression, and all the different hearing aid companies explain all of this stuff on their websites in great detail, sometimes without any real good engineering background, but they do explain it. And part of the reason why I'm talking about all this stuff is to explain why I've listed certain features on Hearing Tracker and not others, because a lot of the things that you see here on this page, and sorry I didn't read the other ones, but a lot of these things you're going to find in almost every hearing aid now. It's very, very common for most hearing aids to have, to some degree, they're going to have some of these things. And the hearing aid manufacturers, they do all kinds of funny things, like they'll say with digital noise suppression, they'll say you'll get 5 decibels of digital noise suppression with the cheaper hearing aid, but with the more expensive hearing aid, you'll get 8 decibels of digital noise suppression. And they do all kinds of stuff like that, and it can get really complicated. So, basically, it's going to be something that you're going to have to do a little bit of research beyond Hearing Tracker to kind of learn more about these features with a specific product, or something that you're going to want to talk to your audiologist about. Okay. So, improve your next hearing aid experience with Hearing Tracker. So I'm sorry it's taken me a little while to get here, and I really wanted to have some discussion with you guys. So I'm going to, again, try to go as quickly as I can. Now, there's a few things on this page that are really important. Okay, one is you can see where it says underneath her name, hearing provider in Greenville. Okay, underneath that, it says service quality complete and verified provider complete. Okay, now this is a new thing that we're doing with Hearing Tracker, and I'm sorry that it's not further along than it is, because I think that this is going to be a really really valuable thing for consumers. Basically, with the service quality badge, what we've done is we've created a best practice protocol survey which audiologists can complete. And they tell us if they're providing all of those essential services that we talked about earlier in the presentation. If they're providing the vast majority of those things, I can tell you that I don't think anyone's submitted the survey and said they've done everything. But if they're like over 90%, then we're going to give them the service quality badge. Okay, the verified provider badge is a little different. They've got to send us some patient files to review. Okay, and they need to take all the names of the patients out so that we don't find out who those people are, because we don't want to know. But we need to see some documentation from the provider to show us that they are actually providing these services. So the service quality badge, I think it's still got some value, but that is not verified. So they could just be telling us that they do those things. I think the mere fact that they've completed the survey and said that they do those things, it's a good thing. It's a positive thing. But if you see the verified provider badge, which there are very few in our system right now, and that's something we're working on and trying to educate people about, then that's a great thing. And that means we've personally had a look at that person's work and want to put our name on it. So okay, the other thing that you can see on this page is you can see the person's got some user reviews. They've got a 91% score. Now, I might just take a moment to explain how our scoring works on the providers. You'll notice that a lot of these providers have a really pretty good score. And the reason for that is because the surveys that are completed by their patients are generally very positive. So the ones who are participating with our system are usually pretty good, and they're usually pretty confident that their patients are happy. So I don't want you to think that these reviews are meaningless. I've been dealing with a lot of these people on a personal level, back and forth with email and on the phone, and I've seen some of their files, and I've got a good feeling about this. And I've actually received a number of patient surveys that have been completed on paper and mailed in from me from real patients. So I know for a fact that a lot of these, the vast majority, are genuine reviews from genuine patients. So take that for what it's worth. But stay tuned, because I'm hoping to build a really big repository of these reviews to help people. The other thing is, when you go onto Hearing Tracker, we have something called the Hearing Tracker rank. Okay, and that's driven by the patient reviews, but it's also driven by the audiologist outcomes. So if the audiologist has had their patients complete an outcome measure with their hearing aids as part of the review, they get extra bonus points and they get pushed up in the rankings. So that's something that, if they're high in the ranks, then you can tell that they've done something good. Okay, so some of you may have used our website already. We've got a really great searching system that's backed by a super powerful database. And basically, you can search for providers based on any number of things. You can find out what services they provide by just clicking a button. If you need a hearing aid evaluation or a dizziness and balance evaluation, you can find out what brands they fit, what kind of education they have, qualifications that they have. So you can literally tick a box for, I want somebody who fits Phonak hearing aids, and then search your zip code, and hopefully someone will come up. Again, we're still adding providers, but you can see how it's going to work once we get more of these people in. You can also narrow down the providers by the Hearing Tracker Awards, and those are those badges that I showed you on the other page, where you've got the service quality verified provider, so you can actually go ahead and click those. Oh, by the way, the Excellence Award is if they've got 10 or more reviews and a score over 90%. There's only, I think, one person at the moment that's actually got that. Hearing aid products and customer reviews. This is a sample hearing aid page. You can click on the review button if you want to review it. If you click on the purchase button, what happens is it brings you to a list of providers in your area that fit that brand, so that you can go and have a discussion with them. So we're not trying to sell you a hearing aid through our website. We just want to help you to connect to a local audiologist that you can discuss it a little bit more with. And you can go in there and tell them, I'm interested in this hearing aid. You may not be a candidate for it, but it's something that you can at least kind of get on the right track to have a discussion with somebody about it. And again, you can look at verified reviews. You can look at the features of the hearing aids. All those features we talked about earlier that are part of my Apples and Apples features, you can actually click on, and it'll narrow down the hearing aids based on that feature. I think that I am at the end. I'm really happy to be here. I've only got 5 minutes for questions, so I'm really sorry about that.
I've been reading the comments that people put in the chat box, and I think we're going to have to do a sequel. But in any event, let me get started on the questions because there's several here. Joe Gordon wants to know, my question is that an in-the-ear hearing aid can cost $2,000, but many times the mold is so uncomfortable. Why don't the hearing aid companies get more involved with molds? That must be behind the ear is letting me know.
Okay, so you're referring to, did he say an in-the-ear hearing aid or a behind-the-ear hearing aid? Yeah, I'm guessing that he means behind the ear, because oftentimes what happens is the audiologist will order the actual hearing device from the manufacturer, and they'll order an ear mold from a separate company. There's so many different companies out there that provide ear molds, and you've kind of given me an idea to try to find out. Maybe a survey would be good to find out which ones are actually producing the best results. I know that hearing aid companies are involved with ear molds when it comes to certain products. Some of the hard shell tips that go on the end of the behind-the-ear hearing aid. So if you have a behind-the-ear hearing aid with a little wire and then a hard shell tip, those are oftentimes 3D printed at the hearing aid factory. I know when I worked in New Zealand, we had to order those from a place in Canada, and it took a while to get them. And it was actually happening at the Phonak facility, I think, in Canada. But yeah, I don't know why. I think there's not a lot of money in ear molds. I mean, that's my guess. They're fairly inexpensive to purchase wholesale, and I know that they're kind of troublesome because
okay, the next question comes from Susie. How do you know that you can trust the AUD with Theremin management?
If it kind of would add a lot to their business to get into that. I'm going to be brutally honest and say that I wouldn't necessarily trust everyone. If they have had a specific course in cerumen management as a part of their AUD program, then I think that is someone that you can probably trust. But I would really discuss that with the person if you're not comfortable or if you have any doubts. My program at Vanderbilt, it's top university, it did not include a cerumen management course.
Susie also says, in my 27 years of having 4 different hearing aids and working with 5 AUDs, never ever did any of these AUDs use these forms. I'm assuming she's referring to the surveys. Yeah, that is a big problem. Yeah, we really need to work on incorporating that better, and we have gotten a little bit better. Like the surveys that we do show that Harvey would like to know, during normal conversation, is the telecoil of any value if there is no hearing loop?
These surveys have been around for decades, so it's something that I'm trying to raise awareness on. No, it's not. Possibly if you have, you can get a neck loop, which can communicate with your telecoil, and that NIC loop
Susie also
can
wants to
receive
know, with
sound
many
from
AV selling
an FM
devices
system.
from only one or two
So
manufacturers,
if you
how do you make
if you wanted to
sure
have an
that you
FM
get the
system to help
best
you in background
one,
noise, you could do
volume
it
and
through your
frequency-wise, for
telequotes.
your specific needs?
I mean, this is a big problem in our industry right now, where a lot of audiologists, basically the private practice audiologists, is kind of like a dying breed. I think that in the last 10 years or so, it's dropped from 40% of practices were privately owned and autonomous, and now I think it's something like 20%. That's some work from Dave Smirga with Au.D. He talked a little bit about that and did some studies on that.
As it's 9 o'clock, I just want to check
remember the name of the study right now,
Cindy.
but if you
Cindy,
want to
are
get in
you
touch
able
with me, I can
to
send
stay
you that
on just a few
information.
more minutes until we get through the questions? Great. She said sure. Okay. Next question. Is the test described for checking against the prescription the same as real ear testing? And is the prescription generated by the computer reliable?
Yes. Well, it's subject to user error. Okay, so basically, there's a number of different prescriptive methods, and it's up to your audiologist to choose which one to use. So there's some that are actually made for children, and there's some that are made for adults, and there's some that are better for people with high-pitched hearing loss, and there's some that are better for people with low-pitched hearing loss. So it really depends on your audiologist if they've, first of all, chosen the right prescriptive method to create your prescription. So it does get a little complicated, but they need to choose the right one. And then some of them actually require extra input. So there's one called the NAL NL2, and with that one, you have to put in the gender of the patient. You have to tell how old the patient is, how many years of experience they have with hearing aids. I forget all the factors, but some audiologists just skip that part, and they don't put that extra information in, and that actually changes the prescription. So yes,
is the test box
the computer may not get the right prescription all the time.
Measurement?
And again, that is large. I would say it's not so much the computer's fault as it is the person using the computer. It's sometimes part of the same device, and it's sometimes separate. So actually, the one that I showed you in my presentation in the photograph had a test box inside. You remember the one where the man was pointing at the computer? That one actually has a test box and a real-ear measurement system in one.
Audiologist Julia
for example, the
Sturkins would
Fry
like to
system
know how many
has two separate ones.
How many audiologists have registered
yeah,
this
there's a
far
bunch
on
of
Hearing
different
Tracker,
manufacturers,
and where are they
some of
located?
them have them combined. There are about 550, I think, audiologists who have registered. So again, it's a far cry from the 17,000 plus we have listed on there. But it's a start, and it's not a bad start for starting in March. And I do encourage everyone listening to please talk to your audiologists, ask them to sign up, ask them to participate with this project. Because I think it's important. I couldn't tell you where they all are. That is a good question. I know where a lot of them are, but they're really scattered all around the country. I will try to create a map for you.
Asked, what is an FM system? I think I might defer in the interest of time to the HLAA website at hearingloss.org.
So that's a good idea.
We have a massive section on assistive technology, and I think you'll be able to find the answer to your questions there about FMs and infrared and hearing loops. Okay. I think that is all the questions, and this was very interesting. This is such great information for new hearing aid users and those that are looking to make a change. And I thank you very much, Abram, for providing this information and taking time to present this evening. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. And I'll try to make a copy of the guideline available for you guys. The other thing I'm hoping to do is create a checklist that you can use. There are some checklists out there, but I'd like to create a new, better one based on the guidelines, so that you can, find out from your audiologist whether or not, these are some services that they're going to provide. But let me create that, and maybe I can get Nancy to send it out to the people that were here today. Once
I'm happy to post that.
I just want to thank you guys again for coming in today, tonight.
And don't forget also we have a downloadable
so thank you so much for being here, and thank you for the questions.
From our office. That's a consumer's checklist for purchasing a hearing aid, which is a great tool to take to your audiologist to make sure that you ask those questions and get good information when choosing a hearing aid. Thank you again. Yeah, take a look at that. It's a really good tool, but if you have any suggestions for improving that, please let us know. We do update that form occasionally. Again, thank you. Happy holidays to everybody, and thank you again. Good night.
Okay.